The morning my daughter squeezed my hand 3 times under the Christmas table, I already knew something had been wrong for weeks. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I'm 67 years old, retired from 31 years as a detective with the New Zealand police. And I live in a modest weatherboard house in Napier, on the Hawke's Bay coast. I have a vegetable garden out back, a dog named Biscuit who is getting too old to chase seagulls, and one daughter, Rosalind, who is the reason I get up every morning, and the reason, on that particular Christmas day, I couldn't sleep the night before. Let me tell you something about signals. In my line of work, you learn quickly that people rarely say the dangerous thing out loud. They leave traces, a hesitation, a glance toward the door, a hand that grips yours just a little too tightly under the table. My late wife Carol and I had a system with Rosalind when she was small. 3 squeezes meant, I need you. Something is wrong. Don't make a scene. We invented it when she was 8 years old, after a neighbor's party where a man had said something to her that made her uncomfortable. She'd found my hand across the table and squeezed. 3 times. I'd made an excuse, and we'd left within 10 minutes. She never had to say a word. Carol passed away 11 years ago. Rosalind was 29. She had just finished her degree in landscape architecture and was beginning to find her footing in the world. We grieved together, the 2 of us, in that quiet house in Napier. And somewhere in that grief our signal became something private and precious, a reminder of the 3 of us. And then, the 2 of us, and the language we'd built together. She hadn't used it in 14 years, until Christmas. Rosalind had met Marcus Holt 18 months before that Christmas. She'd introduced him to me on a Sunday afternoon at a cafe in Havelock North. A tall man, early 40s, well-dressed in the way that suggests deliberate effort rather than natural ease. He sold property, commercial real estate, he explained, mostly in Auckland and Hamilton. He had a good handshake and a wide smile, and he asked me 3 questions about myself before steering the conversation back to his own accomplishments. I noticed. But I said nothing. You see, Rosalind had been lonely since Carol died. Not in an obvious way. She had friends. She had work. She had a busy life. But I knew my daughter. I knew the particular kind of quiet that settled over her when she drove home alone on Sunday evenings. I knew she wanted a partner, a family, a life that matched the warmth she carried inside her. When Marcus appeared, I watched him through her eyes and tried to see what she saw: confidence, ambition, certainty. He moved through rooms like he owned them. What I saw through my own eyes was something slightly different. A man who listened only long enough to calculate his response. A man who, when Rosalind told a story she found funny, smiled with his mouth but not his eyes. A man who, when the bill arrived, took just slightly too long to reach for his wallet. Small things. Nothing I could name, without sounding like a bitter old father who didn't want to share his daughter. So I held my tongue. I had dinner with them. I admired the apartment they eventually moved into together in Hastings. Marcus's choice, not hers, though she said she loved it. I met his friends, who were polished and loud. I watched Rosalind adjust herself around him in the subtle ways that women sometimes do, wearing her hair differently, laughing more quickly, apologizing for things that didn't require apologies. I told myself it was normal. I told myself I was projecting. Then came November. And the house. Carol and I had bought our home in Napier in 1991. It wasn't much, 3 bedrooms, a bit of land, close to the sea. But we'd renovated it carefully over 30 years, paid it off, and it had become, in the way that modest houses do when they hold decades of a family's life, worth considerably more than we'd imagined. After Carol passed, I'd had it valued out of practicality. The figure had surprised me. I'd updated my will and left it to Rosalind without a second thought. In November, Rosalind rang me on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual. She normally called on Sunday mornings. "Dad," she said, "Marcus thinks it might be a good idea if we talk to you about the house." I asked her, "What about the house?" "He thinks we think that it might make sense for you to consider moving somewhere smaller. A retirement flat. Maybe. He knows a developer in Napier who's doing a lovely new complex near the waterfront, and then the equity from the house could be invested properly. Marcus has contacts. He says the return could be significant." I was quiet for a moment. Then I said I'd think about it. I got off the phone and sat with Biscuit in the kitchen for a long time. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was something more like the particular alertness I used to feel when a case started to show its shape. That moment, when the random-seeming pieces begin to arrange themselves into a pattern that your instincts recognize before your mind can name it. A man who sells property. A man who has a contact with a developer. A man who has been dating my daughter for 18 months and now wants to discuss what happens to my house. I did not say this to Rosalind. I asked, carefully, over subsequent calls, whether she and Marcus were planning to buy a home together. She became slightly evasive. She said they were looking at options. She said Marcus thought it was better to invest than to own in the current market. I asked if Marcus owned his own home. There was a pause. She said he'd sold his Auckland apartment last year when the market was good. He was renting in Hastings. I noted that down in the part of my mind that keeps notes. In early December, I did something I'm not entirely proud of, though I don't regret it. I made some inquiries, informally, through an old colleague who still worked in financial investigations. I gave him Marcus Holt's name and asked him to see what he could find. What he found took 2 weeks to compile, and it arrived in my email inbox on the 21st of December, 4 days before Christmas. Marcus Holt had been married once before. His ex-wife was a woman named Patricia who lived in Wellington. The marriage had lasted 3 years. During that marriage, Patricia had sold her late mother's home and transferred a significant portion of the proceeds into a joint investment account that Marcus managed. When the marriage ended, the account was empty. Patricia had taken him to civil court. The case had settled, quietly, for a fraction of what she'd lost. Marcus had also been in a long-term relationship before that 5 years, with a woman in Tauranga. That woman, according to publicly available court records, had filed a complaint against a financial services company Marcus was a director of. At the time, the company had dissolved before the complaint was resolved. 3 squeezes. That's what I thought when I read it. I thought about ringing Rosalind immediately. I sat with the phone in my hand for 20 minutes. Then I put it down. I had learned, over 30 years of investigations, that the worst thing you can do when you know something is tell the wrong person at the wrong time. Rosalind loved him. If I came to her with documents and accusations on the 21st of December, 4 days before Christmas, she would feel ambushed. She would defend him, and Marcus would know I was watching. I needed to see them together first. I needed to see her face. Christmas at my house had been a tradition since Rosalind was born. Even after Carol died, we maintained it. Rosalind would drive up from Hastings. We'd have a proper lunch. We'd walk down to the waterfront afterward. Simple. Ours. This year, Marcus came too. He arrived with a bottle of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc and an anecdote about a golf game that went on slightly too long. He was relaxed in the way that people are relaxed when they feel they've already won something. I watched Rosalind during lunch. She was quieter than usual. She ate slowly. She refilled Marcus's glass before her own. When he made a joke, she laughed a half-second after it landed, as if she was checking first that it was safe to. I knew that look. I had seen it on witnesses who were afraid of someone in the room. We sat at the old Corey table that Carol had found at an auction in 1998. Marcus was talking about property yields. He had a theory about regional New Zealand real estate that he was explaining to no one in particular. I was passing Rosalind the bowl of roasted kumara when her left hand found mine under the table. 1, 2, 3. I did not look at her. I kept my expression completely neutral. I said, "Marcus, would you like more lamb?" And when he turned toward the serving dish, I squeezed her hand back. Once. Firmly. "I hear you. I've got you." After lunch, I asked Marcus if he'd mind taking Biscuit out to the garden for a few minutes. Marcus agreed with the enthusiasm of a man performing pleasantness for an audience. When he disappeared through the back door, I turned to Rosalind. She looked at me. Her eyes were red at the edges, the way they went when she was holding something in. I said, "Tell me." She took a breath. Then it came out in fragments, the way things do when they've been compressed for too long. 3 weeks earlier, Marcus had presented her with documents. "A trust structure," he said. "Tax efficient. Smart planning." He wanted her to be named as a trustee of a new family trust their future. He called it, and for her to contribute her assets as the initial settlement. Her assets, meaning the inheritance she'd received from Carol, meaning the money she'd saved over a decade of work, meaning, and would she speak to me, her father, about the possibility of transferring the Napier house into the trust as well, since it would eventually come to her anyway, and doing it now would protect it from any future complications. She'd asked a solicitor friend at work about it, informally, over coffee. Her friend had gone pale. She'd said, "Do not sign anything. Not without independent legal advice. Not without understanding who the trustee is and what control you'd actually have." Rosalind had gone home that night and said nothing to Marcus. She'd been saying nothing for 3 weeks, smiling, cooking, sleeping next to him every night with this thing sitting in her chest like a stone. "I didn't want to believe it," she said. "I still don't want to believe it." I told her I knew. I told her about the inquiries I'd made. I showed her, on my phone, the summary my colleague had sent. Not everything, just enough. The ex-wife in Wellington, the dissolved company, the settlement. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "How long have you known?" 4 days, I said. She looked at the table. "You waited." I told her I needed to see her face first. I needed to know if you were all right, or if you were frightened, because those two things need different responses. She looked up. And then, for the first time that day, she looked entirely like herself. We had about 12 minutes before Marcus came back in from the garden. We used them carefully. I had already spoken to a lawyer I trusted, a woman named Helen who'd handled Carol's estate and who I knew to be sharp and discreet. I had rung her that morning before they arrived, on the chance that today would be the day things needed to move. Helen had given me the outline of what Rosalind needed to do. Sign nothing. Retain independent counsel. Document any pressure. Rosalind needed to get out of the flat, not dramatically carefully. She had a friend in Havelock North who knew nothing of this, and whose couch was available. She would go there for a few days after Christmas. Tell Marcus she needed time to think about the trust documents, and let Helen's office handle the conversation from there. When Marcus came back inside with Biscuit, we were washing dishes and talking about the neighbor's new fence. He stood in the kitchen doorway with the easy smile I had disliked since the beginning and said, "Everything all right?" "Lovely lunch," I said. "You'll have to come back in the new year." He said he'd like that. He put his arm around Rosalind's shoulders, and she leaned into him in the way she had learned to, and I dried a plate and thought, not much longer. They left at 4. I watched the car reverse out of my driveway and stood at the gate until it was out of sight. Then I went inside and rang Helen. The following weeks were not simple. These things never are. Marcus, Once Rosalind had left for her friend's house and retained a solicitor, became by turns charming and then cold. And then when it became clear she was not returning threatening in the particular way of men who have never been refused. He accused her of paranoia. He accused me of poisoning her mind. He rang me once, on a Tuesday evening, and I listened to his voice very carefully and said very little and recorded the call, which is legal in New Zealand when you are a participant in the conversation. Helen's office, in the meantime, had established that the trust documents Marcus had prepared contained a clause that would have given him sole discretionary authority over any assets settled into it. Rosalind's contributions would have been effectively his to manage, invest, or as the fine print permitted, loan to related parties, which meant loan to himself. The trust had no independent oversight, no defined distribution schedule, no exit mechanism for Rosalind without Marcus's consent. Helen described it, in her measured professional way, as a structure she would not have recommended to any client she cared about. We passed the information about the previous cases, the Wellington ex-wife, the Tauranga complaint, to a colleague of mine who was still serving. I don't know what came of it officially. I don't know if enough was provable to constitute fraud. What I know is that Marcus Holt left Hastings in February. His rental in town was vacated. His number became unavailable. He did not contact Rosalind again. She moved into a flat of her own in Havelock North in March. It was small, but it was hers. She brought a plant from our garden, a cutting from a rosemary bush that Carol had planted in 1993. She put it on her kitchen windowsill. I visited on a Saturday in April. We sat on her small deck and drank tea and watched a pair of paradise ducks in the paddock beyond her fence. She was quieter than she used to be, but it was a different kind of quiet, settled rather than suppressed. I recognized the distinction. She said, "I keep thinking about how long I ignored things." I told her that was the hardest part of these situations, not the betrayal, but the retrospect. The way you go back through every moment and wonder what you missed, what you chose not to see. I told her that doesn't make you foolish. It makes you human, and it makes you the kind of person capable of trusting someone, which is not a flaw, she said. You saw it, though. Early on, I told her I had a professional advantage. 31 years of learning to notice what people don't say. She's had no such training. That's not a deficit, it's just a difference. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I should have trusted the rosemary." I looked at her. She smiled. Mom always said rosemary was for remembrance and for knowing your own mind. We sat there until the ducks moved on and the light went gold over the bay. There is something I want to say to anyone who is watching this and who recognizes something in it. Not necessarily the details, but the feeling of knowing, somewhere in the part of you that has always known things, that something is wrong, and talking yourself out of it because the knowing is inconvenient, because you love the person, because you don't want to disrupt the arrangement, because it's Christmas and the wine is open and everyone is smiling. Listen to the signal. It may not come as 3 squeezes under a table. It may come as a hesitation when you mention your savings, a conversation that happens without you, a signature request that arrives just slightly too casually, a new partner who is most interested in your assets during the early warmth of the relationship, when you are least likely to examine motives clearly. New Zealand has real protections for people in these situations. The Property Relationships Act, the Trusts Act, 2019. These are frameworks designed to ensure fairness, but they only help you if you get independent legal advice before you sign anything. Not from your partner's solicitor, not from a general friend, from someone who is explicitly working for you and only you. Financial abuse is the form of domestic harm we talk about least and recognize latest. It is slower than other forms. It is dressed in the language of planning and investment and our future. It is delivered by someone you have decided to trust, which is precisely why it is so effective and precisely why it is so damaging. If someone is pressuring you to move assets, restructure your estate, contribute to a joint vehicle you don't fully understand, or access money that belongs to a parent or family member, pause. Get independent advice. Call a trusted person who has nothing to gain from your decision. And if you are the trusted person, the parent, the sibling, the old friend, and something about a situation presses against your instincts, say something, carefully, at the right moment, not as an accusation, but as a presence. Let the person you love know that you are there and that they can use the signal, even one they haven't used in 14 years. Rosalind came to Napier last month for my birthday. She brought pavlova and a bottle of local rosé, and we ate out on the deck while Biscuit dozed at our feet in the last of the autumn sun. She seemed, for the first time in a long time, like someone who was inhabiting her own life rather than managing it. At the end of the evening, when she was leaving, she hugged me at the gate for a long time. Then she pulled back, took my hand, and squeezed it. 3 times. I squeezed back. "I hear you. I've got you." She got in her car and drove home. I went inside and made tea and sat with Biscuit in the kitchen and thought about Carol and about the rosemary still growing in the garden and about all the years a signal can wait in silence until the moment it is needed. Some things, it turns out, don't have an expiry date.